People who weren't there always ask the same question. They want to know the moment it turned. They picture something dramatic. A shout, table overturned, a door kicked open. They want a pivot they can point to. I understand the impulse. It's easier to believe that history bends at a single loud instant than to accept the quieter truth, which is that the thing was already decided before most of them walked into the room. Was Maren Voss's aide for 11 months inside the Joint Treaty Commission. I carried her files. I poured her water. I sat 2 seats behind her at a curved table of pale stone in a chamber that smelled of recycled atmosphere and old authority, and I watched the most patient person I have ever known wait out an institution that had spent 11 months mistaking her patience for confusion. They were not confused themselves. That is the part I want to be precise about, because the account that circulates since tends to flatten the commission into a caricature. Bumbling administrators who simply hadn't noticed what was in front of them. That is not what they were. The commission knew exactly what they were doing. The suspension of substantive sessions was not bureaucratic drift. It was policy, conducted with the unhurried confidence of a body that had never once been told no by someone who could enforce it. They adjourned on procedural grounds. They tabled motions. They discovered urgent secondary matters requiring resolution before the primary agenda be addressed. They were courteous throughout. They offered Delegate Voss excellent water and a chair position 2 degrees lower than the gallery's main seating tier, and they called it an oversight every time she noted it, and they corrected it each morning, and it was 2 degrees lower again by afternoon. I am not a diplomat. My title at the time was Secondary Attaché for Resource Documentation, which meant I verified figures and managed filings, and understood in more granular detail than most of the senior staff exactly which lanes and extraction corridors were under discussion, and exactly what those lanes were worth. I had run the numbers before we arrived. I had run them again during the first adjournment, and the third, and the 7th. The outer transit lanes the Commission was quietly partitioning among its 7 member bodies represented the single most efficient routing corridor between the inner settled systems and the 3 outermost extraction fields. Whoever held those lanes collected a transit toll on every hauler, every freighter, every ore carrier that moved through. In 20 years, at projected traffic volume, the lanes were worth more than most of the member bodies' home territories. Not in military terms. In the terms that actually sustain a civilization: fuel, materials, time, the slow accumulation of everything that a species needs to keep growing. Had been working those lanes for 6 years, before the Commission convened. We had not asked permission. The lanes passed through unclaimed transitional space. We filed the surveys. We registered the corridors. Built the relay infrastructure. 47 relay stations in total, each one representing 2 years of engineering work, and a materials cost had required 3 separate budget authorizations from the Home Council. The Commission's position, formalized in a document titled the Interstitial Sovereignty Resolution, was that unclaimed transitional space was the collective inheritance of all recognized species, and that Earth, newly recognized and not yet a full member of the Commission, had been operating in those lanes on a provisional tolerance that could be withdrawn at any time by majority vote. The vote, the document suggested, was a formality. The document was circulated to us 3 days before the Commission opened its first session. Delegate Voss read it on the transit from Earth. She read it twice, which was her habit, once fast, once slow. She folded it, set it on the armrest, and looked out at the dark for a while. Then, she asked me to check the registration timestamps on all 6 of our lane surveys against the effective date of the Interstitial Sovereignty Resolution. I checked. The surveys were older, all 6 of them filed with the Interstellar Registry between 14 and 19 months before the resolution's effective date, I told her. She nodded once. The way she nodded when something confirmed what she had already suspected. And she asked me to pull the registry's certified copies when we arrived and to keep them. I kept them. The Joint Treaty Commission met in a structure called the Quorum Hall, on a station positioned at a gravitational equilibrium point between 3 of the 7 member bodies' home systems, equidistant, neutral, and, in the opinion of the member bodies who had designed it, permanent. It was a large station, built to last, built to impress. The corridors were wide and high-ceilinged, surfaced in a pale composite material that muted sound and caught light evenly, so that the whole interior had a quality of institutional serenity. Everything considered, everything deliberate, everything designed to communicate the weight and durability of the institution inside it. The quorum hall itself occupied the uppermost tier, a long rectangular chamber with a vaulted glass ceiling through which you could see the star field and, on certain approach angles, the dim outlines of ships at the outer docking rings. The ceiling was a design choice meant to convey openness, the literature said. In practice, it conveyed surveillance. The sense that you were being watched from above by something larger and darker than the room. The commission seated 7 permanent delegates and 1 observer per recognized associate body. Earth held observer status. The observer's chair was at the far left end of the curved table, slightly separated from the main arc. There was a small placard. It said, Earth, Associate. The lettering was smaller than the others. I don't know if that was intentional. I came to assume that most things in that room were intentional. The permanent delegates were not unkind. That is also something I want to be precise about, because the easy version of this story makes them villains. And they were not villains exactly. They were representatives of bodies that had operated without competition in those lanes for generations. And they had built entire fiscal architectures on the assumption that they would continue to do so. Earth's 6 years of activity in the outer corridors had not yet disrupted anything materially. The toll infrastructure was still underdeveloped. The traffic volume not yet at the level where the revenue gap was felt in any home administration's actual budget. But they could see the projections as clearly as I could. And they were not unintelligent. And they had concluded, reasonably, from where they sat, that the cleanest solution was to codify the status quo before Earth was in a position to contest it. The Interstitial Sovereignty Resolution was that codification. The Joint Treaty Commission was the mechanism by which it would be made official, and the 11 months of procedural suspension were the cushion of time they needed to complete the background work. The lane assignment treaties, between member bodies, the revised toll schedules, the enforcement protocols, the subsidiary agreements about inspection rights, and maintenance obligations. Before they brought Delegate Voss to the table for what they intended to be a signing ceremony. She understood this from the first week. She told me so directly, was her habit. She did not use indirection with her own staff. We were sitting in the small anteroom the commission had assigned as our working space, which had no window and air, that always smelled slightly of the seals on the ventilation panels. And she said, they are not going to negotiate. They are going to wait until the paperwork is finished, and then present us with a completed structure and ask us to formalize it. And I said, what do we do? And she said, we wait. I want to be honest about what those 11 months were like for the staff. We were a small team. Myself, Voss, a senior communications officer named Drek Hanley, who had been in diplomatic postings for 30 years, and had the face of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything in his second decade. 2 junior aides whose names I will not include here because they have gone on to other work, and their patience in that posting deserves more privacy than a public account. 5 of us in an anteroom at a second-tier posting, watching session after session adjourn on procedural grounds, while the commission staff moved through the corridors with the quiet efficiency of people who knew exactly where everything was going. Hanley adapted first. He was constitutionally suited to long games, I think, not because he was passive by nature, but because he had been in enough situations where patience had been the decisive variable that had developed a genuine appreciation for it. He began, during the early weeks, playing a private game of identifying the specific procedural objection before it was raised. Not mockingly, not with any performative contempt, just as something to do with his attention in sessions that offered very little else. He was not particularly good at it in the beginning. By month 4, he was rarely wrong. By month 7, he could identify the objecting delegate by the set of their shoulders before they even reached the microphone. He shared none of this with anyone outside our room. That was discipline, and I admired it. In the evenings, When the commission staff had cleared the corridors and the station went to its lower lighting cycle, Hanley would sometimes sit in the anteroom with a cup of something warm and tell stories about other postings. Long ones, detailed, with a dry attention to the specific texture of institutional failure that I found genuinely instructive. He had been in places where the patients had not paid off too. He did not pretend otherwise. One posting in particular, a treaty arbitration that had run 4 years and ended with a negotiated outcome that neither party considered satisfactory, he would return to occasionally, not with bitterness exactly, with the careful precision of someone who has learned exactly where a specific decision went wrong and wants to hold onto that knowledge. That one had turned on whether to produce a key document early or wait, he said. They had produced it early. The other party had found a procedural mechanism to delay its formal acceptance for 18 months, while they restructured their position. By the time the document was formally entered, its leverage had been consumed by the delay. He did not say this to Voss in any pointed way. He said it the way he said everything, as a piece of the record offered without instruction. She listened the way she always listened. The junior aides struggled more, and I will say that plainly, because it would be dishonest to describe those months as easy for everyone. They were both talented people who had expected a posting with more action in it, and 11 months of watching an institution not move is genuinely hard on people who came into the work because they believed in the work. I tried to be useful to them without being condescending about it, and I don't know how well I managed that. There was a period in month 8 where the mood in the anteroom was genuinely difficult, a flatness, a heaviness of the kind that accumulates when effort produces no visible result over a long time. Voss noticed it. She reorganized the daily schedule slightly, gave each of the junior aides a specific research task that was genuinely useful, and that would produce an output they could see and evaluate. The mood lifted somewhat. She did not explain what she had done or why. It was simply done. Voss herself was, I will use the word that kept occurring to me then, and still occurs to me now, occupied. She was not idle during the adjournments. She read, she ran figures, she had long conversations with Hanley about procedural history, about how the commission had handled similar situations in the past, about the specific charter language governing observer status rights. She corresponded extensively with the Home Council. Not requesting instructions, I came to understand, briefing them on progress in a way that preserved their confidence without creating expectations about timing. That is a specific skill, and it is rarer than most people realize. The Home Council was patient with her, and I think part of why they were patient was that her briefings never promised what she could not deliver, and never asked them to trust her in any way that felt like asking them to trust blindly. She gave them the framework. She explained why the timing was what it was. She did not tell them about the registry documents. That was hers to manage, and involving the council before the moment was right would have created political pressure to act, which was the one thing she could not afford. She slept well as far as I could tell, and she ate at regular intervals and was unfailingly courteous to the commission staff, including the ones who brought us the wrong documents on 3 consecutive occasions in month 6. The same wrong documents, each time. An error that I privately believed was deliberate but could not prove. She did not raise her voice once in 11 months. She did not, to my knowledge, express frustration to anyone outside our team, and she expressed it to us only rarely, and then only in the specific form of a single sentence, level and precise, that named the thing she found frustrating and set it aside. The commission's delegates read her composure as passivity. I know this because their behavior toward her shifted over that period in a way that was unmistakable once you were looking for it. In the early sessions, they had been formally careful, watchful, precise in their language, treating her presence as something that might require management. There had been, I thought, a genuine wariness in the early weeks. They knew about the registry filings. Their legal staff had flagged them before the commission convened. The original commission strategy, as best I could reconstruct it from available evidence, had involved a provision in the resolution that would have superseded prior claims in transitional space under specific conditions. That provision had been removed from the final draft. I never found out exactly why. Whether their legal analysis had concluded it was unenforceable, or whether removing it was itself a strategic choice meant to avoid drawing attention to the prior claim issue. Possibly both. What I know is that by month 5, the wariness in how they treated Voss had relaxed to something else. By month 9, the sessions in which she was nominally present were being conducted as though she were furniture. Delegates spoke across her. Procedural objections became less elaborate. Not because they needed to conceal them anymore, because they had concluded she wasn't going to do anything about them regardless. In month 10, the Commission's chair, Assessor Halvorn, described the outer transit lanes to a colleague in the corridor outside our working space. Loud enough that I heard it clearly, standing 2 meters inside the door. As already settled, I told Voss. She thanked me. She asked if I had the registry copies somewhere secure. I said yes. She asked me make a second set and put them in Hanley's case. I did. The final session was called for the 53rd week of the Commission's deliberation. It was announced as a resolution session. The agenda, arrived the evening before, was 3 pages long. Items 1 through 14 were procedural matters, approvals of records, certification of documents, membership confirmations. Item 15 was titled Formal Adoption of the Interstitial Sovereignty Resolution, with associated lane assignment schedules. Item 16 was titled Observer Witness Acknowledgement. That was us. We were item 16. Party to item 15. A witness to it. Hanley read the agenda in full and set it on the table without comment. One of the junior aides swore quietly. The other went very still in the way people go still when they are deciding how to feel about something before they allow themselves to feel it. I looked at Voss. She was reading item 16 again. Expression was the same expression she had when she read anything. Level, taking it in, not yet done. I asked if she wanted me to pull the registry documents for the morning. She said yes. She said to put them in a single folder, not the full certified copies, just one sheet, the summary index with the registration numbers and the filing dates. One sheet. I asked if that was enough. She considered this for a moment. Then she said that it would be more than enough. I prepared the folder that night. 1 page. 6 lane to designations, 6 registration numbers, 6 dates. All of them predating the resolution by at minimum 14 months. The Interstellar Registry's seal at the top, which is a dense circular glyph in deep blue. That looks, if you have not seen it before, like something decorative rather than something binding. It is not decorative. It is the oldest continuous legal authority in the settled systems, and its filings are, under the founding compact of every member body of the Commission, irrevocable and supreme in questions of prior claim. I had known this for 11 months. Voss had known it before we left Earth. I did not sleep well that night. The resolution session convened at the second morning bell. The quorum hall was full. Not merely the 7 permanent delegates and their staff, but observers from the member body's home administrations, trade representatives, 2 journalists from interstellar publications whose presence told you something about how confidently the Commission expected this to conclude. The hall had a different energy than the procedural sessions. Those had been quiet, almost somnolent. This one had the compressed alertness of a room that believes it is about to witness something finished. Voss walked in ahead of me. She was wearing the dark formal coat she wore for significant sessions. Not the working jacket, the coat. It was a deep charcoal, fitted, the Earth Diplomatic Service insignia on the left breast, small and dark, not decorative. She walked to the observer's chair at the far left end of the table and sat down. And she put her hands flat on the table in front of her, and she was still. Assessor Halvorn opened the session. He was a long-limbed delegate with a quality of physical deliberation. Every movement, considered before it was made. That had, I think, contributed to the Commission's confidence. He was not a rash figure. He ran through items 1 through 14 with the efficiency of a body that has rehearsed this. And each item was approved. Each approval was noted by the Commission's clerk. And the room's energy built in the way energy builds when you are approaching a conclusion that everyone has agreed upon. Item 15. Halvorn read the formal title. He read the summary of the resolution, the history, the collective inheritance language, the authority by which the Commission was acting. He read the lane assignment schedules, Which corridors to which member bodies with what toll rights, under what enforcement protocol. It took 23 minutes. I know because I timed it. The room was attentive throughout. 2 of the journalists were taking notes. Then the vote. 7 delegates. 7 hands raised without hesitation, one after another in the way votes go when the outcome is not in question. Halvorn noted the adoption. He noted it as unanimous and final under Commission Charter. He noted that the associated schedules were now binding upon all recognized bodies, operating in the affected corridors. He looked at the record clock and noted the time. Then he turned to the left end of the table. He said that the Commission recognized the Earth observer and invited her formal acknowledgement as witness to the proceedings, provided for in the Charter's observer protocols. The room was quiet, not the tense quiet of uncertainty, the settled quiet of a thing completed, waiting for the last signature on a document that was already decided. Voss stood. She stood slowly, the way she did everything, not performatively, not with any theater, just with the consideration of a person who had decided what she was going to do, and was now doing it. She was composed. Her hands were at her sides. She looked at Halvorn, and then she looked down the arc of the table at all 7 delegates in sequence. The way you look at something you are making sure you will remember correctly. She did not speak. She reached into the folder I had placed in front of her, and she removed the single sheet and she set it on the table. She set it facing outward, toward the Commission, with the registry seal visible at the top. She did not slide it forward. She did not present it. She simply placed it and withdrew her hand. Then she picked up her coat, which she had folded over the back of the chair, and she walked out. I followed her. I carried the folder. I did not look back, but I heard, with the specific clarity of sounds that happen in rooms that have gone, abruptly and completely silent. The soft friction of the sheet being lifted from the table, the pause, the sound of a chair adjusting, and then nothing. We were in the corridor before anyone spoke. Hanley fell into step beside me. He said very quietly, "How long do you think?" I said I wasn't sure. Minutes, probably, for someone to run the registration numbers against the resolution's effective date. Maybe less, if their legal staff had the registry filing system up. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. We went back to the anteroom and we sat down, all 5 of us, and we waited. This is the part that people who weren't there seem to find difficult to understand. They expect that we were tense. They expect a war room, a scramble, a team coordinating responses. But there was nothing to coordinate. The document existed, or it didn't. The dates were what they were, or they weren't. Voss had known for 11 months. She had simply been waiting for the session in which the knowledge would matter. She poured herself water. She drank it. She set the glass down. 14 minutes after we left the quorum hall, the Commission's senior legal officer came to our anteroom door. He was a small, precise figure who had been managing the Commission's legal architecture for, I was told, 30 years. I had seen him often in the corridors during the 11 months. Always purposeful. Always with the contained efficiency of a person who has a great deal to manage and manages it well. He had the look, now, of a person who had spent the morning confident and was in a completely different relationship with the morning. He asked to speak with Delegate Voss. She said yes. He came in and stood near the door and said that the Commission's legal staff had reviewed the document she had left on the table and wished to understand its implications before the session continued. Voss said, "It's a summary index from the Interstellar Registry. The registration numbers and filing dates are on the page. You're welcome to pull the full certified copies if you need them." He said the Commission understood what the document was. He said the question was whether Earth intended to assert the filings as a prior claim, defense against the resolution. Voss said, "The filings aren't a defense, they're a record. They exist whether we assert them or not." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the document in his hand and looked at Voss and looked back at the document. Then he asked what Earth's position was with respect to the lane assignments adopted in item 15. Voss looked at him with the same level attention she had given the agenda the night before. She said, "Earth's position is that we filed 6 lane surveys with the Interstellar Registry between 14 and 19 months before your resolution's effective date. The registry's founding compact, which every member body of this commission has ratified, establishes that registered surveys constitute prior sovereign claim in transitional space, and that subsequent resolutions cannot void them. We didn't contest the vote. We didn't interrupt the session. We witnessed it, as item 16 invited us to. But a witness to a proceeding that contradicts an irrevocable prior record doesn't ratify the proceeding by her presence. She just watches it happen. He looked at the document again. Then he said, "This will require the commission to recess," she said. Of course, he left. The door closed. None of us said anything for about 30 seconds. Then Hanley said, without particular emphasis, "Well." One of the junior aides asked if the commission could challenge the registry filings. I said they could not. The founding compact's prior claim provision had no challenge mechanism, only a dispute resolution process, and the dispute resolution process required both parties to agree to arbitration, and Earth had not agreed to anything. The junior aide thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "So what do they do?" I said I didn't know exactly. I said that was their problem now. We waited for 4 hours. The commission did not call us back to the session. What they did instead, according to Hanley's sources, he had spent 11 months building careful relationships with the commission's administrative staff, quietly, over long meals and shared complaints about ventilation, and the particular tedium of procedural paperwork, was convene a closed emergency review. That included all 7 delegates, the senior legal officer, and 2 external consultants brought in over secure link from a registry law firm with offices near the central settled systems. The journalists, who had expected to file a completion story and had drafted most of it before the session began, were waiting in the hall outside the quorum hall in increasing perplexity. At the 3rd afternoon bell, Halborn's office sent a formal note requesting that Delegate Voss remain available for a reconvened session the following morning. The note was in the commission's standard letterhead format. The register code at the top, which indicated the priority level of the communication, was one I had not seen on any note to us before. It was the commission's highest internal priority level, the one reserved for urgent legal matters. Voss read the note, set it down, and asked me if our scheduled departure transit had been confirmed. I said it had. She said, "Good. We should make sure the berths were held." I looked at her. I said, "You anticipated this." She said that anticipated was probably the wrong word. She had prepared for it. There was a difference. Anticipating implied a single expected outcome. Preparing meant you had done the work and then kept doing it, regardless of what the outcome looked like from the outside. I asked her when she had decided not to raise the registry filings earlier. During the suspension, I meant. During any one of the 50-odd adjourned sessions when she could have put the document on the table and changed the commission's calculus immediately. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "If I had put it on the table in month 1, they would have found a way to work around it. They had time and resources, and the institutional assumption that problems can be managed if you catch them early enough. I needed them to finish the work first. I needed the lane assignments written, the toll schedules finalized, the enforcement protocols in place. I needed item 15 voted and adopted before I put the document down. Because a commission that has just formally adopted a resolution that contradicts an irrevocable registry filing is not a commission that has a management problem. It is a commission that has a legitimacy problem. And you cannot manage a legitimacy problem the way you manage an early-stage complication. You can only absorb it or reverse course." I asked her which she thought they would do. She said she thought they would take a long time deciding, which was itself an answer about the institution. The reconvened session the following morning was not like the resolution session. It was held in a smaller room, without observers, without journalists. The 7 delegates were present and Halvorn chaired, but the energy was entirely different. Not the directed momentum of a body completing a planned sequence, but the careful, deliberate attention of a body that was trying to determine what it was looking at. The senior legal officer was present. He had the registry's certified copies in front of him, the full set, not our summary index. I do not know when he had obtained them. They looked as though they had been read several times. Halvorn opened by saying that the commission had reviewed the document Delegate Voss had presented and wished to discuss its implications for the proceedings. Voss said she was happy to discuss them. What followed was 4 hours of the most precise legal conversation I have ever been in the room for. This is not hyperbole. Every word was weighed. Every citation was checked. The senior legal officer led the commission's side, and he was thorough and careful and gave nothing away. But you could see, if you knew what to look for, the shape of the problem as the commission's staff understood it. The prior claim provision of the Registry Founding Compact was not ambiguous. It had been drafted to be unambiguous 300 years ago by a body of legal scholars who had anticipated exactly this kind of scenario, a settled body asserting collective inheritance over corridors that a newer party had already surveyed and registered, and had closed every door deliberately. The surveys predated the resolution. The lanes were Earth's by prior claim. The resolution, as adopted, had no legal force over them. They didn't say this directly. They asked questions. They explored language. They tested the edges of various provisions. Halvorn was particular about the question of whether Earth's observer status at the time of the filings created a different legal standing than full membership. It was a reasonable avenue to explore, and it was not entirely basis. Voss let the Commission's legal officer walk through it fully before she addressed it, and when she addressed it, she did so with the same level precision she had brought to everything else. And the avenue closed. There were 2 others that took longer to close, and one that took until the afternoon recess. When the session resumed after the break, the mood in the room had shifted in a way that was not dramatic, but was unmistakable. The quality of a room that has finished testing the walls and found them solid. When Halvorn asked, in a tone that had become somewhat careful, what Earth's intentions were with respect to the outer transit lanes going forward, she said, "The same as they've been for the past 6 years. We operate them. We maintain the relay infrastructure. We don't interfere with traffic from anybody in good standing." A delegate near the far end of the table, one of the quieter ones, who had said almost nothing across the full 11 months, asked whether Earth would be amenable to a revised framework that formalized the existing operational arrangement with appropriate recognition of the member body's historical presence in adjacent corridors. Voss looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds like a negotiation." The delegate said, "Yes." Voss said, "I've been here for 11 months. We can talk about it." There was a silence in the room. Not the settled silence of the previous day, when the outcome was agreed upon. A different kind of silence. The kind that happens when a room full of capable people is adjusting its understanding of how long the other side has been paying attention. I kept my face neutral. I had learned that from Hanley. The session recessed for lunch, which was the first time in 11 months that the Commission had offered us the members' dining room rather than the smaller secondary facility. We sat at a long table with windows that looked out across the station's exterior ring and, beyond it through the glass, at the star field and the outer docking arrangements. Hanley pointed, without drawing attention to the gesture, at a configuration of shapes visible at the far docking ring. I looked. I knew what they were. Earth's survey and relay maintenance fleet, which had been positioned there for the past 6 weeks, under routine operational cover. Maintenance rotation for the relay infrastructure in the outer lanes, which was a real task that needed doing, and which had the convenient property of requiring the fleet to be exactly where it was. Voss had filed the maintenance rotation orders 4 months ago. I ate my lunch. It was better than what we had been served in the secondary facility for 11 months. What followed across the next 6 weeks is the part that gets documented in the formal record. And the formal record is accurate as far as it goes. The Commission suspended the interstitial sovereignty resolution pending legal review. The lane assignment schedules were set aside. A revised framework was drafted, one that treated Earth as a primary operating party in the outer transit corridors, not an associate observer, with toll-sharing arrangements that reflected Earth's actual infrastructure investment and a governance structure that gave Earth a full seat at the Commission table. The negotiations were detailed and occasionally difficult. There were 3 weeks in which the toll-sharing figures were genuinely in dispute, and the sessions ran past the second evening bell. Were delegates who felt the outcome was unfair to their member bodies, and some of them were right by their own logic, and I thought their logic was not entirely wrong. They had been there first, in a meaningful historical sense, and what was happening to their fiscal projections was real, and I tried not to be dismissive of that. But the lanes were ours. They had been ours since before the Commission drafted the document that said they weren't. And Voss had known it, and had waited, patiently, and entirely without drama, for the moment when that knowledge would have the most weight. There was one session in the 4th week where the toll-sharing dispute became genuinely sharp. One of the mid-tier member bodies, projected revenue loss under the revised framework, was proportionally the largest of any of the 7, forward an argument that was procedurally creative and that took 2 days to fully address. Their delegate was young, by Commission standards, and clearly talented, and she pressed the argument harder than anyone had pressed anything in our presence for the preceding 11 months combined. I found myself respecting it even as I was relieved when Voss and Hanley between them found the counter. Afterward, in the anteroom, Hanley said he had been genuinely uncertain for about 40 minutes, and that was the most uncertain he had been during the entire posting. He said it the same way he said everything, as a piece of the record, offered without flourish. The revised framework was signed at the end of the 6th week, in the quorum hall, at the full arc of the curved table, with a placard that said Earth, Member, in lettering the same size as the others. The signing was attended by the same journalists who had been in the room for the resolution session, plus several more who had arrived when word got out about what had happened. They were looking for a story with sharp edges. There wasn't one, really, unless you had been in the room for the 11 months before. Halvorn sat across from Voss during the signing, and I watched him watching her, the expression of a person who is revising a long-held assessment and is not yet sure what the revised assessment is. He was not hostile. He was genuinely recalculating. He had been running a commission that treated patience as weakness for long enough that he had stopped asking whether that assumption might occasionally be wrong. He would, I suspected, not stop asking again. Voss signed the framework document with the same unhurried quality she brought to everything. She handed the pen back to the clerk. She said nothing. Halvorn said, formally, for the record, that the Commission welcomed Earth as a full member and looked forward to a productive relationship going forward. Voss said, thank you. That was it. That was the whole of it. We flew home in the same configuration we had arrived in. 5 people. The same berths, the dark of transit, the low hum of the drive. On the 2nd day out, somewhere in the long featureless stretch between the Commission station and the first relay, Hanley opened a small bottle of something he had been carrying for 11 months and poured 5 glasses and said he would like to make a very short observation before we all went back to doing our jobs. He said, I have been in this work for 30 years, and I have never seen anyone wait that long and that quietly for something that was already theirs. Voss said, it was always going to be ours. The only question was whether we were going to be at the table when they figured that out or not. Hanley said, some people in your position would have put the document on the table in month 1. Voss said, some people in my position would have, yes. He raised his glass. We drank. I thought about the document. 1 page, 6 dates, a seal in deep blue, 11 months in a folder in my case. Exactly as authoritative on the first day as on the last, waiting with the same patience its author, apparently possessed, for the moment when the room was ready to understand what it was looking at. I have been back to the Commission twice since then. Different postings, different matters. The hall is the same. The glass ceiling, the curved table, the recycled air. The placard at what used to be the observer position has been removed entirely, because Earth is not an observer anymore. There is just a chair, and it sits level with the others. I think about those 11 months sometimes, when a situation seems to require patience I'm not sure I have. I think about a woman sitting at a table slightly lower than everyone else's, with a folder in front of her containing the one piece of paper that made everything after it inevitable. Doing the harder thing, which was not acting. Waiting for the institution to complete its work before she showed them what work it had done. The Commission had read her silence and concluded, wrong, we had nothing to say. They had been wrong about that from the beginning. The only question was when they were going to understand it, and Voss had decided, quietly and without any announcement, that the answer to that question was going to be their problem to work out, not hers. She was right. She usually was. Is a thing that happens to people who spend a long time waiting in institutions that are ignoring them. It is not exactly boredom, though boredom is part of it. It is closer to a kind of atmospheric pressure, the weight of an environment that is continuously communicating, through every small signal available to it, that you do not matter to the outcome. The chair at the wrong height. The incorrect documents, times. The corridor conversations held at a volume calibrated precisely for you to hear without being able to formally object to. The commission was not crude about it. Crude you could dismiss. This was precise. Every signal was individually deniable and collectively unmistakable, and resisting it required a kind of deliberate, continuous internal effort that does not show on the outside, but costs something regardless. I watched Voss absorb it for 11 months, and I am still not entirely sure what the mechanism was. It was not, I think, that she didn't feel it. She noticed everything. I knew that from the way she would occasionally name a specific signal to me or to Hanley, precisely, and without embellishment, just to establish that it had been seen. What she appeared to have was a relationship with the pressure that I can only describe as structural. It was as though she had built something internal to hold the weight, so that the weight was there, but the thing it was pressing against was solid, enough that it didn't move. She never explained this. I am not sure she would have found the explanation particularly interesting if I had asked for it. She was a person who was more attentive to what was in front of her than to her own interior, at least more willing to act from the former than to speak from the latter. I thought about this often during month 9, which was the hardest month. By then the commission's behavior had settled into something almost contemptuous. Not actively hostile, which would have been energizing in its own way, but indifferent in the specific manner of a body that has concluded the thing it is ignoring cannot affect it. There is a particular quality of being dismissed by something competent and deliberate that is worse than being dismissed by something stupid and careless. The commission was neither stupid nor careless. They had assessed the situation accurately by their own lights. Earth was new. Prior claim filings were in a registry that their legal staff had apparently concluded was either manageable or irrelevant, and the delegate sitting at the far left end of the table had done nothing in 8 months to suggest they were wrong. I understood their conclusion. I just knew something they didn't. And Voss had fun it longer, and more completely, and had decided, for reasons she eventually explained to me, and which I have tried to represent accurately here, that the knowledge was worth most when it was deployed last. The closing weeks of the negotiation had their own texture, distinct from both the suspension and the legal confrontation. The commission's delegates were, in that period, genuinely different to deal with. Not because they had become friendly, exactly, because they had stopped operating on assumptions they now knew to be wrong, and were adjusting to a more accurate read of the situation. There is a particular quality that comes into a negotiation when both parties are working from genuine positions, rather than one party working from a position and the other performing compliance. The air changes. The conversations become more direct. People stop hedging language they don't need to hedge anymore. Halvorn was the slowest to shift. Watched him across 8 sessions of the Recede framework talks, and he spent the first 3 of them still testing whether there were angles he hadn't tried. He was thorough that way, not grasping, not panicking, but professional enough to want to be certain he had examined every available avenue before accepting the outcome. By the 4th session he has accepted it, and after that he was actually a useful negotiating partner. His instinct for structure was genuine, and once he was working toward a real outcome, rather than a managed one, he applied it productively. One of the subsidiary clauses in the final framework, the maintenance cost-sharing provision for relay infrastructure in the corridors nearest the member body's systems, was largely his construction, and it was a better solution than anything Voss's team had proposed in that area. I noted that at the time. These things are worth noting accurately. The junior aide who had gone still when she read the agenda the night before the resolution session asked me, near the end of the 6th week, whether she thought the whole thing had been worth it. The 11 months, she meant, the way it had been done. Whether it would have been possible to get here faster. I said I thought the answer was no, that my confidence in that was limited. Because I was not the one who had made the assessment. I said the person who had made the assessment had more information than I did, and had a better read on the institution, and had been right. Perked. I said that was probably the only measure that counted in retrospect. She thought about that for a while. Then she said she thought it would have driven her out of her mind. And I said I thought it probably would have driven me out of mine too. And we agreed that this was likely why neither of us had been the lead delegate. I have told this account to 2 people before setting it down in writing, and both of them asked the same question at the end. What was in the folder? What was the document? They expected something more elaborate. Classified intelligence, perhaps, or a military commitment, or a political agreement with one of the member bodies secretly negotiated around the commission's back. When I told them it was 1 page, 6 dates, and a seal, they were quiet in the way people are quiet when the thing that changed everything turns out to be simpler than they needed it to be. That's the accurate account. 1 page was enough because the dates were right. And the dates were right because 6 years before any of this, before the commission existed, before the resolution was drafted, before anyone in that hall had turned their attention to the outer transit lanes as a political matter, someone had done the work of filing the surveys and had filed them correctly. The document did not create the outcome. It recorded it. The outcome had been created 6 years earlier by the unglamorous work of being first and doing it properly. Everything else. The 11 months, the folder, the single sheet placed on the table, was just waiting for the room to catch up to what was already true.